What's up, doggies? It's your boy Beanie Kaloon, and today I'm going to be making a more serious video, a video about some pretty disturbing true crimes, specifically crimes that involve pedophilia, and I'm going to be ranking these crimes on a tier list. And I know that might sound a little insensitive, but I want to make it very clear I am not idolizing or supporting any of these pedophiles or the crimes they committed. I'm simply making a tier list based on how disturbing these crimes are and how interesting they are in like a true crime perspective, how interesting the story is. I've always been a big fan of true crime, and pedophilia is perhaps the most disturbing crime someone can commit. So today, I'd like to take a look at some of the most notorious pedophile cases and rank them on a tier list. The first person I'd like to take a look at is Larry Nassar, a gymnastics trainer at the highest level who molested hundreds of minors, many of whom were Olympic athletes. Larry Nassar would insert his fingers into his victims' vaginas as well as fondle their breasts and convince them that this was common medical procedure and would help them out with their gymnastics. He managed to get away with this for over 30 years at the highest level, convincing multiple police detectives as well as numerous parents what he was doing was strictly medical and not a form of molestation. Larry's story starts off when he was only 15 years old and he became the athletic trainer of his high school despite having no medical knowledge. He was a trainer for numerous sports at his high school, but he spent most of his time with the girls' gymnastics team. He had a position of power over these gymnasts, telling them what they should or shouldn't do, how to practice, how to stretch, and perhaps even touching them inappropriately. However, there is no evidence that he was molesting girls at this age. He would travel with these gymnasts to different meets, making connections with coaches, as well as on his off days, he would go to different gymnast centers and offer his help for free to these different coaches and teams. Many gymnasts and coaches took a liking to Larry as they found his ambition and interest in the sport a very commendable thing, and they did not see anything creepy or weird about his fascination. After this, Larry would get a college degree in kinesiology and would quickly go back to the gymnasts that he had made connections with, offering to work for free. Gymnast teams were happy to have him. He would pay for his own travel costs as well as his own rooms, offering 24-hour assistance to any gymnast that needs it. Somehow, no one saw anything weird about this. In fact, the coaches loved him and so did the gymnasts. While Larry was gaining trust from gymnasts and coaches, he was simultaneously abusing these underage girls. According to Larry, there were pressure points in the vagina that could send blood to various parts of the body. No matter where the girls were in pain, whether it was their back, shoulders, neck, or hip, Larry would always claim putting his fingers inside of their vagina would help them out. Larry was able to work his way up to the very top of his position, becoming the medical coordinator for USA Gymnastics, working with Olympic-level child gymnasts. At this point, he was already accused multiple times of molestation by many of his victims, but none of them would go to the police. They would go to their parents or different coaches, and every single time their parents and coaches would blame it on the child, saying it was their own dirty mind and that Larry was a professional and that they had nothing to worry about. With Larry being able to work his way up to the top of his position as well as avoiding any accusations of molestation only made him much more brazen with his abuse. He would often do his procedures with no gloves, as well as many times even in front of the children's parents, convincing everyone that this was completely normal. The first ever official police report against Larry Nassar was over 20 years into his abuse, filed in 2004. Brianne Randall Gay, a 17-year-old girl dealing with scoliosis, detailed her experience with Larry, saying he massaged her butt and inserted his fingers into her vagina for around 20 minutes. After that, he massaged her neck for under a minute and then began fondling her breasts for another 15 minutes. You would think logically, case closed, lock him up. You don't put your fingers in a girl's vagina as well as fondle her breast to deal with scoliosis. Unfortunately, this is not the end of Larry's story. He was able to completely manipulate these detectives, showing the police a PowerPoint that he had made himself, explaining the benefits of inserting your fingers in a girl's vagina as well as fondling their breast. It sounds unreal, but this is a true story. He completely got away with it, telling them it's strictly medical. He would go another 10 years molesting his victims before another official police report was made by Amanda Tomashow. Amanda was a 24-year-old girl who scheduled an appointment with Larry for hip problems. Larry would do his creepy shit where he tried to put his fingers in her vagina. However, Amanda stopped him and even pushed him off of her. Larry would continue to try to touch her vagina, explaining to her that it's strictly medical, doing all his manipulation. However, Amanda was not having it. Larry would eventually give up on the vagina and attempt to fondle her breast for a hip issue. This is when Amanda pushed him off once again and got dressed and attempted to leave, but Larry stepped in front of the door, blocked her out from leaving, and tried to explain once again how what he was doing was strictly medical. Fortunately, Amanda would end up getting out of there and filing a police report. When detectives came to question Larry, Larry was able to once again convince them everything was completely normal and this was just a misunderstanding.
And then what she says, again, just like you're showing me, you're explaining to me, is that your hand had went in between her butt cheeks.
Right.
And then she said that had went more towards her vagina and the vagina hole.
Well, not.
That's the way she's explaining it to me. So,
okay.
And again, I'm not using medical terms, I'm using her terms,
okay.
right?
That's okay.
So what she says that your fingers went by her vagina hole, and that she felt again that was a massaging nature, and that she felt that had went on for too long, and that you hadn't explained it to her prior to you doing it, so it was unexpected to her that she didn't know that was coming, and then when you were doing it, that she felt like it was not.
Was I talking to her during the time, though, like I normally
So
do?
she says, yes, again, that, how does this feel? Does this feel better?
Right.
And she says that initially she says, yes, it does feel better, so you continue.
Right.
And then she says that at some point that she says that she felt that it was hurting, so she says, hey, that hurts, can you stop? And then you said you stopped at that time again.
Okay. That's what I'm saying. It's an interaction, and I don't know how to say this, but that would be appropriate. It's like, you're working on them, and you're trying to and trying to do the work. You need that feedback from the patient. And I'm getting the feedback, and I'm responsive to the feedback, and I'm talking my way through it, as she said I was.
Unfortunately, in this interrogation, the police detective really doesn't push back against anything Larry's saying, letting him ramble on about his nonsense medical knowledge, really believing almost everything he says, and Larry ends up getting off scot-free again. Luckily, it wasn't long until his next police report in 2016 when Rachel Denhollander came forward saying she was molested by Larry at 15 years old. The detective on this case, Andrea Mumford, did not play around like the other detectives. She saw the similarities with this case and the other ones he was accused of. She looked back and studied his old interrogations, learned all his excuses, all his tricks, and was set on getting this man locked up.
What you're describing to me is very different than how she's describing her experience.
Okay.
All right?
Okay.
That there was no explanation of what you were doing to her or to her mother. And so you can see kind of the consistency from what happened a couple years ago.
Well, no, but okay, but I mean, okay, but I would be, like, that's why I have so many lectures and stuff. I mean, that's what I'm known for is my education. You know what I mean? So I don't.
Your education to
students.
To students,
right.
But not necessarily
to patients. Well, I try to. I mean, like I am. I'm like, I've never had anyone, what's confusing to me about is why wasn't there anything said back when I was treating them if they felt that uncomfortable? You know what I mean? It's like if I'm talking to the patient.
Put yourself being a teenage girl.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
Most people that are sexually assaulted are very uncomfortable. They don't know what to say.
Okay.
They're in a position where they feel.
But the parent was right there. You said the mom was there?
She was in a different part of the room. She couldn't observe.
I have considered an exam room, a different part of the room. It's the same room.
Behind where you were.
Okay.
But I don't think that really the focus is why is it being brought up now. I think
I'm just trying to think of what
it has been brought up, that there are
right.
discrepancies in what she's telling me as compared to the technique that you're describing.
After Larry was completely cooked in this interrogation, he was forced to step down from his job, as well as many articles were posted about Larry's potential crimes. Unfortunately, many of his victims still defended Larry, thinking what he did was strictly medical, but luckily, a lot of victims did come forward after seeing these articles. By the time Larry went to trial, hundreds of girls accused him of molestation, and he would end up being sentenced with over 60 years in prison, and at his age, it was basically just life in prison. The scope of Larry's crimes is one of the largest in history. He was able to manipulate multiple victims, parents, and police detectives of no wrongdoing. In a fucked up way, it's almost impressive. I didn't even cover 10% of all the accusations made against Larry that he was able to avoid. It's truly disgusting. I'm gonna have to throw the Larry Nassar case into A tier. The next person I'd like to talk about is Robert Berchtold. Now, Robert has a lot less victims than other people on this list. However, his story is one of the most insane things I've ever heard. There's a fantastic documentary about this called Abducted in Plain Sight. I'd recommend you watch it if you want to learn more. But if you don't have time for all that, I'm gonna break it down for y'all. The people involved in this story is Robert Berchtold, who is the disgusting, creepy pedophile, and then there are the victims, the Broberg family. The Broberg family was a nice Christian home with 3 daughters, a mother named Mary, and a father named Bob, and the only daughter that we really need to talk about for this story is Jan. Robert met the Brobergs through church and quickly became close family friends with them as he was very charming and manipulative. He would come over for dinner almost every day, he would spend nights there, he would talk with the family, but he spent most of his time hanging around the 10-year-old daughter Jan. Robert knew to get closer to Jan, he would have to get closer with the parents, so he spent much of his time hitting on the mother, Mary, complimenting her, telling her that she had nice legs, she looked pretty, stuff like that. And Mary would admit that she had feelings for him. And Robert would end up going to a church function with Mary, and when they were alone, Robert would actually make a move on Mary, kissing her and fondling her breast. However, they did not have sex or go any further than that. So Robert had successfully won over Mary, however, he wasn't done yet. After this, he would go after Bob. Now, Bob, the father, he would end up talking to him, they were already friends, and he told him that he wanted to go on a drive with him as they needed to talk. And he drove with him, they parked in some discreet location, and he started complaining to Bob about how his wife doesn't satisfy him anymore. Robert would end up pulling out his penis where he was visibly erect and told Bob that he needs some relief. Bob at first would laugh this off thinking he was joking, but somehow Robert convinced Bob to give him a hand job and relieve him. Robert had managed to win over both the parents of the Broberg family as well as getting blackmail on them, and over the next 2 years, he would molest their daughter Jan many times. Most of the time he would give her sleeping pills and he would touch her inappropriately, and the parents did not think a single thing about this. They just thought he was a nice guy, as well as I guess they both had a crush on him. They were completely oblivious of what was going on. Then in January of 1974, Robert was reprimanded by his church for inappropriate behavior with a little girl. And instead of the church, reporting this to the police like you should do, the church decided to take matters into their own hands, giving Robert therapy. Robert somehow spun this situation as an excuse to get closer to Jan. He told the Broberg family about this therapy, however, he didn't tell them the real reason, and told them the reason he was getting therapy was because he was sexually abused as a child, having sex with his aunt at 4 years old, and he told them that the church told him as his therapy he had to spend more time alone with Jan. For the next 6 months, 4 times a week, Robert would lay with Jan as she slept, oftentimes giving her sleeping pills and molesting her. Somehow, the Broberg family had no idea of any wrongdoing. The Brobergs claimed they had never heard of pedophilia at this point, and just wasn't something they were expecting, nor something they were worried about. And this story only gets much more disturbing. On October 17th, 1974, Robert had told the Broberg family that he was going to take their daughter Jan horseback riding. Robert picked her up, gave her some sleeping pills, and kidnapped her. Jan would later wake up in the bed of an RV with a recorder playing a message of aliens telling her that she was actually part alien and she had a mission to have a baby with Robert before she hit the age of 16. And she needed to complete this mission to save the alien race, and if she did not do this, her sister would go blind, and her other sister would be abducted and given this same mission. Jan, only being 12 years old at this time, was completely convinced of this story, and would walk into the other room to find Robert asleep, covered in blood on a couch, where she would wake him up and tell him about this mission. Robert had successfully manipulated this little girl into initiate having sex with him. Robert would show this little girl books about how to have sex and then also have sex with her multiple times in this RV. Meanwhile, while this was going on, the Broberg family had trusted Robert so much, it took them 5 days to even contact the police about their missing daughter. And even after they contacted the police, they told the police that they did not expect any wrongdoing and they weren't sure why he took her, but they didn't think that he kidnapped her, even though he literally did. Once the investigation started, police knew to look for Robert's RV. They would end up finding Robert's car broken into with blood on the outside and footprints around it. However, there is no sign of the RV. During this time, Robert had been escaping to Mexico where he could legally marry their daughter Jan at only 12 years old. However, this wasn't enough for Robert. Robert would end up calling his brother to call the Broberg family and tell them that he would only return their daughter Jan if he gave them permission to marry his daughter inside of the US. The Broberg family obviously denied this request and just wanted their kid back, and luckily Robert's brother wasn't also a creep and actually worked with the police to help get Robert caught, and Robert would end up giving away his location to his brother, which was then given away to the police. 35 days into the kidnapping, the Mexican police would end up knocking on Robert's RV and arresting him. However, Robert would end up bribing one of the police officers with his gold ring to get some alone time with Jan. Robert told Jan that he had also spoke with the aliens and was aware of the mission, and told Jan that he had to tell her parents that this was just a vacation and that Robert did nothing to her, as well as there were 4 things that she could not talk about. She couldn't talk about the aliens, she couldn't talk about the relaxing pills he was giving her, she couldn't talk about their mission, and of course, she couldn't talk about having sex. If she did mention these things, her sister would go blind and her father would be killed. Jan was returned to her parents and Robert was charged with kidnapping. However, Jan was still completely messed up, not really talking to her parents, and was just so focused on the mission and scared that she wasn't going going to be able to complete it if Robert, was in prison. Jan begged her parents to make sure that nothing happened to Robert. However, her parents really weren't having this. However, Robert would end up getting into contact with the father and convincing him to drop all the charges, because if he didn't, he would be forced to reveal the handjob in the car within the court, and the dad did not want this getting out. So instead of arresting the man who kidnapped and molested your daughter, the father let him go free because he didn't want people to know about him giving him a handjob, which it's just truly insane and disgusting. After this, Robert would continue to send many love letters to their 12-year-old daughter Jan, as well as sometimes sneak over to their house and put a recorder tape about more alien messages about their mission. And Jan was just completely convinced of this mission, oftentimes telling her parents that she wanted to marry Robert and that she missed Robert and all this stuff. In fact, this whole entire family was still in contact with Robert, still calling him, asking why, he wanted to marry their daughter. The mother, Mary, on the phone with Robert one time asked him, why do you want to marry my daughter? What's wrong with you? And Robert told Mary that if she came over to his RV, he would explain the whole story. And instead of Robert explaining to Mary, why he kidnapped their daughter and why he wanted to marry her, Robert was hitting on Mary the entire time, telling her how much he loved her, and somehow managed to have sex with her. Robert would end up calling the Broberg family's father about having an affair with his wife to try to drive a wedge in their marriage, as well as this affair would carry on for another 8 months. The whole affair with Mary was just an excuse to get closer to Jan, and over the 8 months of this affair, Robert would end up seeing Jan 9 times, as well as sleeping alone with her 2 different times. Robert had successfully torn this entire family apart, having the father actually file a divorce against Mary. However, Mary never accepted this, as well as the daughter Jan would just oftentimes talk about Robert, talking about how he wanted to marry him, how that she misses him, starting arguments with the family, just really ruined this entire family. In 1976, Robert would move away and buy a family fun center in an attempt to convince the Broberg family to allow Jan to fly out to him and work with him. Obviously, at first, the Broberg family denied these requests. However, Robert managed to convince them by telling them that if they did not fly her out to him, she was going to come either way. She was going to hitchhike and find a way because she was in love with him and he was in love with her. Jan would spend the next 2 weeks with Robert in his RV, where he would molest her more times as she thought this was a part of the mission. But after these 2 weeks, she would return home. But after Jan returned home, it wasn't long before Robert would kidnap Jan for a second time. On August 10th, 1976, Jan ran away from home with Robert, leaving her family a note saying,
"Dear Bob and Marianne, you won't let me do what's right, so I'll do what's wrong. I'm leaving without B, and do not plan on coming back until you accept me as me. I cannot accept your religion or your screwed up morals. I just want to be me and have B. Please, before all of us are destroyed, let me go. Jan."
And to avoid the press, the Broberg family would wait 2 weeks before reporting this second kidnapping. I hate to put blame on the family, but what in the hell is this family doing? It's just disgusting. It took police 90 days to find Robert. However, once Robert was located, they still could not find Jan. The police knew Robert was definitely involved and that he knew where she was, but he was not telling them. So the police would end up staking out Robert's RV, just following him, watching what he does. Eventually, the police would find Robert going to a payphone, and after this phone call was made, they would backtrack the call, and the call was made to an all-girls boarding school. The police would end up going to this boarding school where Jan was enrolled under a fake name and returned her home. Robert went to jail while he was awaiting trial. However, when he was in jail, he convinced 2 inmates to burn down Bob's business when they get out by paying them money. When this business burned down, Jan thought this was her fault, as she was still completely convinced of this mission, and she was just completely fucked up from Robert. As for Robert, he completely beat the arson charges and was only charged with kidnapping, and somehow pled insanity and managed to get away with only getting 6 months. People out here getting locked up for 50 years for selling drugs, but if you destroy an entire family, molest a girl, convince her of aliens, fuck up just the entire family, yeah, it just takes 6 months, you're fine. I can't even speak. I already have a list, but this case is just, I have no words. It's insane. And as for Jan and the rest of the family, they never had to deal with Robert again, and when Jan finally turned 16 and nothing happened, she slowly realized that this whole story was a facade and that she was just being molested. It took her some time, but she would end up coming forward to her friends and then later her parents about everything that had happened, and later on she would write books about it, as well as the documentary Abducted in Plain Sight I talked about earlier. And I don't know, she seems to be doing a lot better now, but I mean, you could only imagine this horrible thing happening in your childhood. Like, this would completely fuck you up. Truly one of the most insane true crime stories of all time. I definitely recommend you watch the documentary, even though I basically just spoiled everything that happens in it. I'm gonna have to give this S tier. Next, I'd like to discuss probably the most infamous pedophile in recent years, Jeffrey Epstein. I'm not going to go too deep into the conspiracies about Epstein, as I don't really want to ramble on for the next 30 minutes about Epstein's connections with the Mossad, or why Clinton was on his flight logs 26 times. I'm going to try to basically just speak about the straight facts we know about Epstein, avoiding the conspiracies as best as I can. Jeffrey Epstein's first known job was a math teacher in an elite private school in Manhattan, New York. He managed to get this job without having any degree in mathematics or science. This job gave Epstein connections with many very high-profile people in the finance world. However, it's arguable he already had connections before this, considering he got this very elusive job without any degree. He used these connections to transition over to the financial advisor world, where he quickly made his own firm, where he only catered to ultra-rich clients. One of Epstein's most notable clients was Les Wexner, who was the former CEO of Victoria's Secret and worth billions of dollars. Epstein was Wexner's primary advisor, as well as given the power of attorney over Wexner, meaning he could basically do whatever he wanted with his money. Epstein was given the power to buy and sell assets, sign checks, borrow money, and manage investments, doing all this without any permission from Wexner himself. Normally, power of attorney is only given to someone in very dire situations where the person has like a serious mental illness, like Alzheimer's or dementia, where they cannot handle their own money. However, Les Wexner had no real good reason to give power of attorney to Epstein, besides the most obvious reason that he was probably into some creepy pedo shit and Epstein had blackmail over him. And Epstein would take full advantage of Les Wexner's money, buying a $13.2 million mansion with his money, as well as Lex Wexner would later come out saying that Epstein misappropriated as much as $50 million of his money, and other people estimate that he spent as much as $500 million. So how Epstein ended up making his fortune and gaining all this power on paper is through being a financial advisor, but anyone with a brain understands that he most likely got all this money through blackmail. Now that we have a rough understanding on how Epstein got his fortune, let's look at the crimes that Epstein's been charged with. Epstein's first run-in with the law was in 2005 when he was caught running an underage sex trafficking ring.
Is it true, sir, that you have what's been described as an egg-shaped penis?
Oh my god, bro. Hell no, man. What the fuck, man? Get your ass on, man. My penis got
Epstein would use Haley Robertson, a 19-year-old girl, to recruit these victims. She would hang around high schools and find minors and offer them around $300 to go give a massage to Epstein and his other clients. During these massages, Epstein and his other clients would touch these girls inappropriately, touch themselves, have sex with them, use sex toys, basically whatever disgusting, creepy pedo shit you can think of. The first person to come forward and report this to the police was an unnamed 14-year-old girl who would testify saying she was molested at Epstein's Palm Beach mansion. After this, around 36 other girls would also come forward talking about their molestation. When police went to go search Epstein's mansion, they found hidden cameras, hundreds of photos of underage nude girls, as well as a massage table and sex toys. All of this directly aligned with what the girls were accusing Epstein of and were very clear signs of an underage sex trafficking ring. However, somehow Epstein was only charged with soliciting a minor for prostitution. Epstein would be sentenced to 13 months in jail as well as 12 months on house arrest. However, his 13 months in jail, he had work release where he was allowed to leave the jail for 12 hours a day, 6 days a week for work. At this time of the first arrest, Epstein already had connections with people like Bill Clinton, Donald Trump, Prince Andrews, and basically just anyone with a lot of power. So, I mean, I know I said I wouldn't go too deep into the conspiracies, but that kind of explains how he ended up getting away with this crime basically scot-free. In 2019, Epstein would be caught doing basically the exact same thing, just on a much larger scale. Luckily, this time he was actually charged with sex trafficking. In this case, hundreds of more victims would come forward, more CP was found, more hidden cameras were found. Unfortunately, Epstein would mysteriously die in his jail before his trial, so we'll never really know the true scope of his crimes. The Epstein case is just truly outrageous, as he had so many high-profile connections with people in politics, finance, and even science, and no one really even understands how he got all this power or how he was able to get away with these crimes for so long. As you can imagine, the Epstein case fuels the fire for numerous conspiracies about secret societies, his mysterious death, his connection with the Clintons, his connection with the Mossad. Like, the whole Epstein thing will just make you lose your mind if you dive too deep into it. From a true crime perspective, I'm not really the biggest fan of the Epstein case because it's all just conspiracies. Now, I don't think the conspiracies are bullshit. I think it's obviously true that there is some secret societies going on, there's some nonsense going on, like, I don't know, but it's just too much work to really try to figure all that out. I don't know who to trust in this situation, and it's just too much. It's not very straightforward. If we knew the true story of what happened, I'm sure it'd be one of the most interesting things of all time, but as it stands, I'm not really the biggest fan of the Epstein case. I'm giving it B tier. The next person I'd like to talk about is P. Diddy. Just like Epstein, this is another example of an extremely rich, high-profile sex trafficking ring. Diddy was able to make his fortune by founding Bad Boy Records in 1993 with artists like Biggie Smalls, 112, Mace, and many others. This got Diddy started in the world of making a whole lot of money. However, he would end up making much more money after this from other endeavors. Most notably was in 2007 when he partnered up with Ciroc Vodka, which at the time was a failing vodka brand, but after, Diddy partnered with them, it would end up absolutely popping off, and Diddy would make tens if not hundreds of millions of dollars from this. And well, when you got all this money and power, the only logical next step is to start throwing some high-profile sex parties, or as Diddy would call them, the freak-offs.
Everybody know ain't no party like a Diddy party, so.
In these freak-offs, Diddy would allegedly throw huge sex parties where he would lure in women by promising them modeling gigs, career opportunities, and even promising them a chance of a romantic relationship. He would also allegedly drug these girls as well as even threaten them with violence while him and his guests all had sex with them. The indictment against Diddy also suggests that Diddy would record his guests and instruct them on what sexual acts to do to these girls, using this footage as some kind of blackmail. There's also many rumors about Diddy being gay, and he would force many rappers and other celebrities to perform gay acts while he would record them and use this as blackmail as well. Considering all the similarities between Diddy and Epstein, a lot of rumors have also sparked up about Diddy using minors for sex at these parties, recording them, and using this as another form of blackmail. However, it is very important to note that Diddy is not being criminally charged with any form of pedophilia or any kind of underage sex trafficking. There are numerous civil cases against Diddy as well as other people involved in the Diddy freak-offs, accusing them of molesting underage minors. However, it's very important to understand the difference between a civil case and a criminal charge. Pretty much anyone can charge Diddy with a civil case without having any evidence. You're not really facing any prison time over a civil case, it's more that you have to pay the victim money if you lose, so I really wouldn't take any of these civil cases too seriously and would think that most of them are probably just trying to get money from Diddy. So the accusations of Diddy and the other people involved in these freak-offs being pedophiles is really just more rumors than anything else. It's mostly from these civil cases, the similarity between Diddy and Epstein, and also just hearsay and rumors like the weird clip of Diddy and Justin Bieber.
So check this out, yo. Justin, you ever seen the movie 48 Hours? Right now, he's having 48 hours with Diddy.
Hey, yo, what the fuck?
Him and his boy, they're having the times of their lives, like, where we hanging out and what we doing. We can't really disclose.
Really, nigga?
But it's definitely a 15-year-old's dream. I have been given custody of him.
I'm not saying there's no chance that Diddy used any minors in these freak-offs, but I do think it's a bit disingenuous to compare Diddy to Epstein, as from what we know so far, Epstein was far, far worse than Diddy. Now, what we know for sure about Diddy is he was flying in victims for the purpose of sex while he was telling these victims the purpose was for some other reason, which is illegal and considered sex trafficking, as well as they found 1,000 bottles of baby oil on Diddy's property, as well as many drugs like ketamine, ecstasy, and GHB. These are all drugs that can be used for sex. Most notably, GHB is also known as a roofie, which is the most common date rape drug. These drugs also match what victims and witnesses claim Diddy was using to take advantage of these girls. They also found illegal firearms at Diddy's place, as well as released footage of him assaulting Cassie Ventura. This footage of him assaulting this girl was not during one of his freak-offs, However, the footage of him hitting a girl as well as illegal firearms supports the claims that Diddy would use violence to force these women to perform sexual acts. With all this evidence, it's pretty safe to say that the freak-offs are a real thing, as 1,000 bottles of baby oil is pretty damning evidence. However, in my opinion, drugs and guns being found at Diddy's place, as well as footage of him assaulting a woman, is not really enough evidence to convince me that he was for sure abusing these women and forcing them to have sex. I mean, like, come on, is Diddy really the first person in the hip-hop industry to be caught with drugs, guns, and assaulting a woman? Like, let's be real. I'm not saying I agree with Kanye that we need to free Diddy, but I just don't think we can say with 100% certainty that Diddy was a sex trafficker, and we definitely cannot say that he was an underage sex trafficker, because I really see no good evidence towards that. I think most people just see the clip of Diddy and Justin Bieber and hear about all the baby oil and think, oh my god, Diddy is the next Epstein, the diddler, you gotta watch out. But when you really look at the facts of the case, like, I don't know. I can see the sex trafficking charges being legit for sure, but there's really no valid evidence at all that he was a pedophile or did anything creepy with minors. Considering this is a pedophile tier list and there's no great evidence of him being a pedophile, I'm going to have to put Diddy into D tier. I'm not going F tier because there still is a chance that he's a diddler, so I'm going to give him D tier for diddler. That's all the pedophiles I'm going to be discussing in this video. Unfortunately, there's still like hundreds of more that I could potentially discuss, and I would have talked about a few more people, but this video is already getting pretty long, and I'm afraid that this is going to get absolutely no views, so if this does get a lot of views and likes, I'll make a sequel to this. Let me know if you guys enjoyed it, and as always, peace out, doggies.